This trip will be close to $50,000. This is the single largest expenditure Rebel News makes every year, is going to the World Economic Forum.
What we are very proud of now is that we penetrate the cabinets.
But I think in some ways it's the most important journalistic mission Rebel News does, because more decisions will be made in Davos that affect our lives in Canada than any other place in the world, with the possible exception of Parliament Hill.
We know that all those challenges cannot be met by governments alone, by business alone, or by civil society alone. We need collaborative efforts.
But I put it to you that many of the policies that guide Canada, from mass immigration to net zero carbon to the war on plastics, all the craziest ideas, they don't actually come from Parliament. They're not actually debated by our MPs. They're cooked up at Davos.
So here we are, and you may ask, why do we have 400 sessions? It is to deal with all the aspects of our global system.
So we have to ask our people for it. Now, we've set up a special website, WEFreports.com. So we've always got to ask people to go to WEFreports.com. That's where all our videos are going to be, and that's where people can chip in.
The future is not just happening. The future is built by us, by a powerful community as you here in this room.
This is how we're going to do it. This is citizen journalism. This is how we roll at Rebel News. Going to the World Economic Forum is one of the centerpiece journalistic missions of Rebel News. It's where we really prove our bona fides as citizen journalists. We did apply to be credentialed. We wrote to their media office, and I wrote the letter and I said, look, we're coming anyways. You may as well credential us so you can talk to us, and we're going to do stories. Why don't you interact with us and help shape our stories? Like I didn't hide the fact that we're generally critics of theirs. They didn't write back in any way. And I hear from our friends at True North that Andrew Lawton, who was credentialed last time, has been denied credentials this time. That tells me that the World Economic Forum is more reclusive and secretive than ever. The good news is Switzerland, in my experience, has the most pro-free speech police that I've actually ever encountered in the world. And as long as we don't do anything harmful that we would never do, as long as we just ask great questions, we can have access to all these VVIPs, like we did with Albert Bourla last time. When did you know that the vaccines didn't stop transmission? How long did you know that without saying it publicly?
Thank you very much.
Like we did with Greta Thunberg last time. You never protest Saudi Arabia or Russia. You only protest Western energy. Why have you never criticized Vladimir Putin or OPEC? So the difference between the Swiss police and, say, the police in Canada is if you ask uncomfortable questions in Canada, the RCMP will grab you like they grabbed our friend David Menzies.
What? Excuse me. What are you doing? You're under arrest for assault. Why are you pushing me? You're under arrest for assault.
In Switzerland, the police don't care about politics as long as you don't touch anyone. So I think this is a great opportunity for us to do citizen journalism. The fact that we are not accredited means we won't be given access to the inner sanctum of the World Economic Forum. We won't be able to get into their official conference center, but we can catch these people on the streets. It's like Banff or Aspen or some other reclusive ski town. These people do go out on the streets, sometimes to walk to a restaurant or walk to a hotel. One of the things I observed last time is there was a citizen journalist from Japan named Masako, very nice young lady who actually told us she was inspired by Abi's work at the World Economic Forum 2 years ago.
Yes, because you spread the courage, and I wanted to wake Japanese people up.
She patiently waited outside a restaurant and actually got to put some questions to Klaus Schwab himself.
I'm from Japan,
Yeah?
and may I ask you for a comment?
No,
We're on our way to the next thing. We're a bit late.
I
but
can
thank
just
you.
walk with
Thank
you and then ask
I think
questions.
we're gonna rush actually. But thank you. Thanks very much.
Which media are you with?
I am an independent journalist from Japan.
no, thank you very much.
Yes.
I have to ask.
So there's a lot of great opportunities for citizen journalists, even though we're not allowed into the inner sanctum. I see Emmanuel Macron, the president of France, is going. I think the likelihood of us having an encounter with him is close to zero. I don't think he would be walking on the street, but you never know. Last time we saw John Kerry on the street, we saw Tony Blair on the street, we saw U.S. governors. How come you're blocking the governor from answering to his constituents? What would you say to your critics who think this is not the right place for America First Republic?
We're trying to, I think my story's pretty clear.
I think, for example, Vladimir Zelensky is going. I don't think he would be on the street. Just from a security point of view, I think they would always have him in like a bulletproof vehicle or surrounded. Like, I don't think you're going to...
They might. They had last time. They had you know where we at that fence, that point that we wait. The Kiev mayor or whatever he was, he was there.
Really?
You have about, because it's from the gate to the car, so they don't walk down that street, but they often catch their rides at that point. So if you'll have to be super fast, and you're not going to get as close because he had a security detail, which I didn't really test, because by the time I realized it, and this is the issue that you have there, is that you need to recognize the people, think of the angle and get to them before it's all over. And that I missed that opportunity. But Zelensky, I think we should be prepared to have at least one or two questions for all these sorts of people.
Yeah. And last time Ukraine had a large kiosk, a large pavilion, where they talked about, they were trying to document what they called war crimes committed by Russia. And I went in there and actually found it very informative. Are there any Russians in Davos? Are there any, I know there's not a Russia house or anything. Are there any advocates or activists for Russia here?
No, of course not. Russians are forbidden here.
Okay, when you say of course not, have they been banned or something, or they just don't show up?
As you know that, okay, I'm sorry, because Russians are not welcome here.
So even though obviously I didn't talk to a senior political official, there are some very informative people who we can find, even if they're not so-called famous, they might be important people that we just don't know about. So, and you can imagine how important the Ukrainian agenda is here, because I see the head of NATO is also here. I see the United Nations Secretary General. So it makes sense that this is the place Zelensky is going, because these are the donors. These are the countries he's seeking foreign aid and military aid from. Tedros from the World Health Organization is going to be there. There's an interesting list. I think that we could scrum the outgoing Prime Minister of the Netherlands, Mark Rutte, who's a World Economic Forum young leader, absolutely atrocious.
Now is the time to make the changes we need to build a climate resilient world, but also to build back better.
Leo Varadkar, another World Economic Forum young leader, the head of Ireland. Just what he's doing to Ireland, whether in his globalism, whether it's immigration or censorship. There are some people there that I think we've already done a lot of journalism about. You're right, Avi, we could have sort of a roster of questions prepared, because when you see them, you're full of adrenaline, because it takes a second to spot them. And then you've got to say, okay, am I talking about pandemic lockdowns? Am I talking about vaccines? Am I talking about Ukraine? Am I talking, you got to instantly get in gear, because you don't know if you've got 30 seconds or 3 minutes. So to have sort of a list of maybe the top 5 subjects that we would go for the leader of Ireland or the leader of France, it's exciting to have this partial guest list, but the key is spotting them and moving quickly and making sure it's all caught on video. So I'm glad we've got a video team. Abi, you've actually been to the World Economic Forum more than any of the rest of us. What's your general advice? For example, how would you go about trying to spot these VVIPs?
It's patience. You got to stand at that entry point for hours. We did it last time, Ezra. I think we almost left right before Bula. That was towards the end of our And then it comes down to just having somebody who's good with faces, and also just taking note, remembering the color code, so the name tags, the lanyards, to make sure to keep an eye on them, and any one of them that has the important color, to quickly read it and Google them and get that done all very quickly. There are so many opportunities there because, like you said, not everyone we will recognize. You know, we have 3 whole days. We have 3 entire days really to be at that gate, and the only time you kind of you don't want to be there is when you're questioning somebody.
Yeah. One of the things we did last time is you see someone, you sort of recognize them, but not quite. But if you have the chance to interview them, we can later use facial recognition to try and identify who they were. And we found that on a couple of occasions. There are some people who are very candid, who are not shy at all about talking about, like I remember that one health expert I bumped into who said every single person at the entire conference, including Klaus Schwab, had to take a PCR test. And I don't believe that for a second, that old alien took that test. So Klaus Schwab himself could be deauthorized if he tests positive.
That's correct.
Wow, it's a very powerful control that you're perhaps one of the most powerful people here. But it was fascinating to hear her boast about that. So again, she's not famous at all, but once we found out who she was quite authoritative. And by the way, I think we will find some people there who are not devilish globalist pals of Klaus Schwab. There are some people there who are just selling something. It's like a trade show. So we might find some people there who are either not deep into it or might even be skeptical or who are just very candid. That's the thing. It is such a collection of, it's one part trade show, one part political conference, one part Dr. Evil's secret lair, and it's a place where lobbyists and politicians and businessmen mingle off the record. That's why BlackRock is there. That's why Chrysler Freeland always went, to meet with lobbyists without having to disclose it. So even though we're not allowed into the inner sanctum, you might see things in a restaurant. You might see things in a coffee shop. So you gotta, we can't put our guard down. As Avi mentioned, we almost missed Albert Bourla. One of the key moments last time is we waited for Greta Thunberg. And we knew she was in a building, and staff came out and said to us, she's gone. They lied to us, obviously. And we waited, it must have been close to 2 hours. And then she finally came out by herself and frankly agreed to walk and talk. She didn't say anything useful, but there we just had to outwait her. Will you renounce violence, Greta? Or do you support Antifa? You've worn an Antifa shirt before. Are you in favor of Antifa? Are there other things or places you think we should be staking out?
Well, I think the restaurants are a big deal, considering the World Economic Forum is the biggest peddler of bug protein on the face of the earth. I want to know if these people are actually eating bugs. We saw when we went to the UN climate change conferences, we saw what they were telling people to eat in the trade shows, and then we were able to get footage from behind the scenes inside the conference where they were happily eating Burger King. So I think that's a big deal. As someone who's been to the United Nations climate change conferences, I'm excited that you guys are not officially accredited. I feel like you're liberated to do real uncontrolled journalism, rather than the carefully curated press conferences that go inside of these things. You are going to get, I think, like last time, unscripted and I think very candid remarks from very important people who are ill-prepared for prickly questions. They're used to the friendly questions from sycophantic media that they get inside of the World Economic Forum events as opposed to out on the streets.
But also with the current war that's happening in Israel and Gaza, it'll be interesting to see how that really falls into this whole thing, and as well as what's happening in Germany at the moment with the farmers. So,
by the way, the president of Israel is going as well. So hopefully we would have a chance to talk to some policymakers on that. See, one of our friends just texted that Javier Milei, the new leader of Argentina, is coming. That's going to be amazing because he's such a libertarian, anti-globalist bomb thrower. I think that could be the highlight of the World Economic Forum. I mean, he is even more rambunctious in his own way than Donald Trump.
I get the feeling he might be stuck at one point and he'll want to sit at our table.
Yeah, that's right. All right, well, listen, I feel like we understand our logistics a bit. We've got, I think, we'll probably have the largest team of citizen journalists there. We did last time. Other people are inspired by our example, though. I mentioned True North is sending a few folks. Last time, Turning Point USA had some folks there, so you may see a couple of others there, but I don't think anyone has the long-standing commitment to this file like we do. So I think it falls to us to be really the chief citizen journalists going there. No one else would have or could have scrummed Albert Bourla, could have scrummed Greta Thunberg, because I think Rebel News, we cover these beats so often, so much. We had 15 minutes worth of questions for Greta. We had 20 questions for Albert Bourla. So I think that, and by the way, I'm glad other citizen journalists are going, and hopefully they'll keep us on our toes. It's very hard to get there. I mean, we've got to fly to Zurich, then we've got to get up to Klosters, and we've got to stay there because Davos is booked up, and every day we got to take the train. Like, it's so onerous. They do that on purpose, and the mindset of these VVIPs is, I've made it all the way to this extremely reclusive, hard to get to place. I can finally let down my guard and hobnob with the other billionaires. And I really think that's it. Like, I can't imagine any other place in the world where someone like Tony Blair or John Kerry would walk around without an entourage, because they feel like they're at a private, sneaky resort getaway, which they are, except for we're the fly in the ointment. And I think that's our role here. And let me close with this. I think the number one thing I learned from our encounter with Albert Bourla, the Pfizer CEO, which is the most watched Rebel News video in our 9-year history. What I learned from that is, just because the VVIP isn't answering doesn't mean we can't ask more questions. I mean, the very fact he wouldn't answer showed the snobbery, the condescension, the elitism, and the undemocratic and non-transparent nature of the World Economic Forum. So by one measure, that interview was not a success at all. We didn't learn a damn thing from him. He wouldn't say a word.
Are you under investigation like you were before for your deceptive marketing, sir?
But we learned about his contempt. We learned that he was not used to real journalism. And we showed, by contrast, that he had never been asked a tough question in his life. So I think we will probably find half of the people we scrum will go completely silent. We have to be ready for that silence with questions asking about the silence. Why won't you answer? Is it because you're only used to set up questions from regime journalists? So I think we have to, that's the one sort of intellectual tweak we have to do, is not to give up just because someone like a John Kerry or a Dr. Tedros doesn't want to answer. We got to keep going in the face of their silence. Normally, going to Davos, as expensive as it is, it's like going to Banff or going to Aspen. It's hard to get there. But once a year, the entire town is bought out by Klaus Schwab and the World Economic Forum. Every single hotel room, every single Airbnb. They're not just buying it out for their own people. They're buying it out to block outsiders. That's why we have to stay a town away in Klosters and take the train in every day. But even in 1, 2, 3 towns away, the prices of Airbnbs quadruples, or sometimes it's literally 10 times more than it is the rest of the year. There are Airbnbs that go for $100 a night that during the World Economic Forum are $1,000 a night. And that's just for a couple of beds. We're 6 people. I'm going to tell you something that's going to shock you. The cheapest Airbnb we could find within an hour's drive of Davos for the 6 of us for the week is $25,000. It's shocking. it's more than $3,000 a day. And it's not worth that. Every other week of the year, it's a fraction of that, but they can extort that money from anyone who wants to get close. And the alternative is to stay 2 or 3 hours away, but we can't do that. We can't do a 2-hour commute and then a 2-hour commute back. We can't do that on these mountain roads. We have to spend our time doing journalism in Davos. Add to that $25,000 or so the flights to Zurich and then the train up. The total cost of this journey for the 6 of us, I haven't done all the math yet because we don't know exactly what we're going to be paying for food and things like that. We're going to shop at the grocery store. This trip will be close to $50,000. This is the single largest expenditure Rebel News makes every year, is going to the World Economic Forum. But I think in some ways it's the most important journalistic mission Rebel News does, because more decisions will be made in Davos that affect our lives in Canada than any other place in the world, with the possible exception of Parliament Hill. But I put it to you that many of the policies that guide Canada, from mass immigration to net zero carbon to the war on plastics, all the craziest ideas, they don't actually come from Parliament. They're not actually debated by our MPs. They're cooked up at Davos. BlackRock has a huge pavilion. They're pumping out their ESG and DEI, diversity, equity, inclusion. All that globalist propaganda comes from Davos. So we are spending $50,000. It should be $5,000, but because they're making it as hard as possible for citizen journalists to get there, we are incurring $50,000 in costs. So we have to be very modest in how we spend our money. We're going to shop at the grocery store, and we're going to cook for ourselves at home. And we've got to crowdfund this. The CBC, which gets $1.5 billion a year, they don't need to crowdfund anything, but they would never go to Davos other than as a cheerleader. You will see dozens of other journalists there, but they will be on the inside. They will be paying to have a pavilion there. And so they won't do real journalism. They'll be there as propagandists for Klaus Schwab. There are journalism companies that are paying $100,000, $250,000 for the privilege of having a seat at the table. They would never in a million years do skeptical accountability journalism. We have to incur this cost because there's no other way to tell these stories. And that's just something we're going to have to communicate to our viewers, that every single video is probably, if you divide it out, if we get 20 great videos out, well, every video costs us approximately $2,500 just in overhead. So we have to ask our people for it. Now, we've set up a special website, WEFreports.com. So we've always got to ask people to go to WEFreports.com. That's where all our videos are going to be, and that's where people can chip in. And it's a huge number. I know that's an astonishing number to pay to. Believe me, we checked out every hotel and every Airbnb in a 100-kilometer radius. They're all booked up. This is how we're going to do it. This is citizen journalism. This is how we roll at Rebel News.